Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. I hear you enjoyed last week's video, so be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done that already, it really does help. Today's video is continuation of the Legacy GPU Battle Series, where we put cards from both camps against each other. As ever, this video was not very easy to make, but more on that later. In March of 2008, Nvidia decided to release their high-end 9800 GX2. With lots of experience from previous models, such as the 7950X2, we saw a return of the 2-in-1 solution. Yes, this card is essentially a sandwich of two 9800 GTX cards in a SLI-capable package. Each GPU core was clocked at 600 MHz and had 512 MB of GDDR3 memory that was clocked at 1 GHz. I'm going to take it apart in a short moment, so be sure not to skip that part of the video. Priced at hefty $599 USD, this monster of a card was really the ultimate offering in the 9000 series of GeForce cards. AMD, on the other hand, 2 months prior, in January of 2008, released their dual GPU offering, the Radeon HD 3870X2. This Terascale R680 featured two of the HD 3870 GPUs that we've tested last week on a single PCB. Unlike with Nvidia, this card was of a much simpler design. Unfortunately, the memory, due to cost, was downgraded to GDDR3, and of course it had to be downclocked to 900 MHz, but both GPU cores ran a faster 825 MHz core clock. The launch price was a cool $449 USD, less that of the two separate HD 3870s. Couple of notes before we take a closer look at both cards. Unfortunately, I had more trouble with the 9800 GX2 than I originally anticipated. The card often refused to output games in full screen, which meant I had to run some in windowed mode. Then, this thing ran stupidly hot, well in excess of 100°C, so forget any overclocking. I planned on testing different games today, but with the annoying black screen and many restarts later, this was not possible. I feel if bad for this card, however, the show must go on, so let's now take a closer look at the design and what really hides underneath that awesome looking metal shroud. My card was made by XFX and featured this awesome futuristic design. Card feels solid, it's quite heavy and it feels really well put together. To power this beast up, you will need one 8 and one 6-pin PCI power connector, and in terms of the display output, this card has two dual-link DVIs and a single HDMI port. However, a quick note here, I could not get the audio to pass through when using it. Compared to the HD 3870X2, this is not even close. I'm sure we would all agree here. The AMD card looks very basic, yet functional, but it has nothing on the design of the 9800 GX2. Very similar, it also requires one 8 and one 6-pin power connectors and will offer two dual-link DVIs and S-video output. Being a Dell OEM, this particular card came with a rather long backplate, which I had to sew off to be able to fit into the test bench. So, let's be brave and take the 9800 GX2 apart. I must tell you, I really don't want to do it. Having this done when I initially bought the card, I'm not really looking forward to this, but what wouldn't I do for you guys, right? This card is covered by two metal shrouds. Let's start by removing screws at the back and then bottom of the card. You'll see the back shroud is then a bit loose, but not free just yet. Removing the rest of the screws will loosen up front shroud too, and this is where you'll need to work the card a bit by pushing and prying it at the top. It does not feel right, this, but eventually you will remove the back shroud. There's a couple of screws that we need to remove before the front shroud comes off. And here's the heart of the beast. What you see here are two cards that are squeezed to a heatsink that lives in the middle of them. I must admit, this is a very complicated design, but trust me, you have not seen the worst of it. And right here, that's a custom SLI ribbon cable which will allow both cards to work together. Let's now remove all 12 screws, which, just for good measure, are of two different colours, silver and black. Remove the two plastic bits that I believe serve as a PCB support, then the DVI mounting screws, a fan header, and lastly, that damned SLI cable. And there you have it, one of the cards is free. It is a very unusual design and not a very pleasing experience. But let's carry on. Again, another 12 screws plus 2 extra securing the I/O bracket and the job is done. I'm pretty sure Nvidia has done some rigorous testing before they signed this cooler off. Thermal pads for memory modules and use of copper should ensure good operating temperatures. Well, at least in theory. But seriously, this card, whilst very silent, idles at around 75 to 80 degrees. Partly because it stays at top clock speeds, but also there's only so much this cooler can soak. A side note, after testing of this card, it was extremely hot to the touch. I had to really let it cool off before I was able to remove it from the test bench. But the time has come to apply a fresh thermal paste and attempt to put this card back together. I'll speed up the video, let's just say it took me over 25 minutes to assemble the card back together. And don't say I did not warn you. Let's get the HD3870X2 open up next. And what a relief, there's only a handful of screws at the backplate and 2 of the retention GPU brackets to worry about. Since I've covered this card on the channel before, I'm not going to spend too much time with it. Think we would all agree it's of a much simpler design, but still impressive. Interesting to see 2 different materials are used in the blower type cooler. Let's put this back together quickly and then move on to some testing. We start by looking at the noise levels, from idle to 100% and then also under a typical gaming load. I think it's quite obvious. The 9800 GX2 is a lot less noisy under the load, and I can barely notice it, whereas the 3870 X2 is very loud at idle and even more so under the load. Not to forget, I'm using the latest available drivers. For AMD it's version 13.1 and 341.74 for Nvidia. As always, haven't benchmarked first, running on a test bench running with i9-10850K. Here, under load, the 9800 GX2 peaked at 104C, whilst the total power draw at wall was at 218 watts. The Radeon HD3870X2 was much better with its 64C peak, but higher power draw at 235 watts. Despite the lower rated TDP, AMD was utilizing both cores more, hence why the higher power draw. The 9800 GX2 was fluctuating with its core usage a lot more here. Sadly, this is also impacting its performance and scores. Both GPUs finished the test and the scores were 438 for AMD and just 388 with the Nvidia card. On a paper, the 9800 GX2 should have made a mince pie out of the AMD card. I rerun the test only to achieve very similar result. I've not applied any overclocks today, in fear of ending the 9800 GX2's life prematurely due to the temps. Let's jump to games next, starting with the Test Drive Unlimited 2. Game run at 1080p resolution with high graphical preset. 9800 GX2 takes the lead here, and despite not fully using both GPU cores, it's managed to beat the 3870 X2 by a very small margin, averaging nearly 49 FPS. The 3870 X2 utilized both GPU cores to about 80%, however, it should be disqualified due to the glitching textures it showed very often. That's 1-0 to the Nvidia. Checking out Fallout 3 using the high preset again, here both GPUs worked as intended, but the 3870 X2 managed to beat the 9800 GX2, offering 56 FPS on average. I saw no problems with either of the cards, but looking at the 100+ degrees made me really feel a bit concerned. That's 1-1, by the way. Next up is Mafia 2. Despite being Nvidia optimized, the 9800 GX2 was not utilizing its GPU cores much over 50% at any time. Averaging 69 FPS on average and much better 1% lows, this was another easy win for the 3870 X2. Both cards will allow, however, smooth gameplay, but a win is a win. That's 2-1 for the Team Red. Because GTA 4 will not launch on 9800 GX2, I tried GTA 5 instead. Both cards failed to engage fully, leaving one of their GPU cores at idle. However, the 3870 X2 fared better here and averaged nearly 24 FPS using 1080p and lowest possible settings, which are called normal here. Needless to say, it showed significant slowdowns at times. This one needs to go to the 9800 GX2. And the last game we've tested today was 2017's Fortnite. Using 1080p and low graphical preset with 50% scaling, I'm not even sure what was up with the GPU usage. 9800 GX2 achieved 49 FPS on average, beating the 3870 X2 by 16%. What's funny here, both GPUs eventually crashed, but this round goes to the Nvidia again. Let's wrap up today's video. These cards came from time where neither AMD or Nvidia were scared to experiment a bit, and both cards, to me, are technical marvels. The single PCB crossfire enabled, or the crazy hot sandwich that the 9800 GX2 is, neither fails to impress me. I'm fully aware my 9800 GX2 is not all that well. Looking at historical articles and benchmarks, it should beat the 3870 X2 often and up to 30% at times. However, this is now, and you saw the results with me. I did not enjoy this week's testing as much, mostly due to the 9800 GX2 being fragile, and I feared it would give up at any time. The 3870 X2 was better in my opinion, however, I can't honestly recommend you buy neither of them. If I ever come across another cheap 9800 GX2, I will be sure to rerun them tests. Did you ever own either of the cards? Please let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned for the next week's video where I will be looking at some old AMD APU. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.